Been waiting for you. Hope you're ready. Come on.
So recently I made a rough hour-and-a-half video on my time with Monster Hunter, sort of a retrospective, and in there I kind of made this mini rant about the handler from Monster Hunter World and Iceborne, and I genuinely think that this topic needs more discussion, so here we are. In this video, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to introduce the handler. I'm going to talk about what her function is in the game, both mechanically and narratively, as well as the more common criticisms that were levied against her and what could have been done to improve those things, as well as what Capcom actually did about it. So, without further ado, this is what happened with the handler. So a handler is the term that's used in Monster Hunter World for what in other parts of the franchise are referred to as quest receptionists. They are the ones in direct communication with the Hunters Guild, and they're the ones that brings your quests to you. The title is very direct. Who would have thought in a game called Monster Hunter World that the titles of their characters would be direct? Mechanically, they supply you with the quests that your character can take on, and oftentimes in a lot of the titles of Monster Hunter games, the quest receptionist is the one character with the greatest connection to the Hunters Guild. It's them who are sending out constant reports to the guild and bringing those reports back to you, the hunter, on what quests you can and cannot do. They're the ones that are telling you the opinion or the goals of the guild in the moment, saying, oh, you have ranked up, the guild has awarded you this. They are also the character that any given player will interact with the most in any Monster Hunter, because basically if you want to go on a quest, you have to talk to them. And yeah, there are other people that you're interacting with a lot, but if you want to do the main thing of hunting monsters, you kind of got to talk to your handler. Besides mechanically doing that, what else does she do within the game? Well, she cooks food for you when you're already out on a quest and you have run out of food, whether you fainted or the quest is taking a really long time and your meals have run out or something like that. But honestly, this isn't a mechanic that gets used very much unless you're fainting. And if you're fainting as a player, you're not going to really want to go and sit through the entire cutscene of this character making food. And that's a point that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So mechanically, what else does she do? Not too much, other than she kind of helps urge the player to continue moving on through the story beats, which is another bit that we will talk about when we get to criticisms. So, narratively, what function does she fulfill? Well, we first need to talk about what function that you are fulfilling as the player. In Monster Hunter, especially in World, they're leaning into this idea that this is a hero's fantasy. You are the hero, but you're a silent protagonist because they want the player to really embody the character, and we're still not quite at the point where we want our main characters to talk. That'll come with Rise, with a lot of divisiveness, I think. Although I think by Wilds, that's kind of smoothed over. So we have a silent protagonist in a world that's trying to be more cinematic and fulfill the hero's fantasy. Well, we need a companion by that person's side, a la Navi to Link and other companions to silent protagonists. I'm mostly thinking of Legend of Zelda references right now. And so then you're going to have the handler. And what that is going to mean for her character is that she's going to need to talk a lot. So you're going to need to have characterization that makes sense with somebody who talks a lot. Why they're going to be like that and why they are going to talk about a lot of like expository things and lore stuff and whatnot. And so it kind of makes sense when the developers were probably thinking of this to go, okay, well, there's the quest receptionist who knows the most about the Hunters Guild and has a plethora of knowledge about monsters and such. And you already interact with that person so much, let's bring them along into the cutscenes. That way we basically have like 2 stand-ins for what the player needs. You have the hero's fantasy, but you also have a character that's giving you the information you need. And with that, you're then going to necessitate this idea of them being partners more than ever before, because now she's out there in the field with you, unlike every other Monster Hunter where she's just standing behind a desk and talking about these crazy things. Now she's actually out there in the field with you. And this fulfills another part of that hero's fantasy, which is rescuing people. And she's the one that's right next to you the whole time. So let's make her the one that needs to be rescued. It makes a lot of sense when you start thinking about like what she needed to be functionality. So what else do we see with her within the game as far as pushing the story along? Well, that also means that she has to be pretty resourceful and a pretty smart character who's asking a lot of questions and trying to dig deep at the quote-unquote mysteries of Monster Hunter and specifically this new world. Unfortunately, this kind of brings into a weird dynamic, especially because the world is in base world specifically is not that mysterious. It's just kind of like, hey, what if there was an ecosystem and food chains? And that's going to blow our minds. And so when she asks any question that's as deep or slightly deeper than that, it's kind of seen as this revelation. But let's also not forget the fact that she is the one asking what the heart of all of this is about, which is the same thing that the Wanderer is doing. So it's not like she isn't asking good questions. It's just that a lot of her questions that she's asking are pretty basic by necessity of what the world is in this game. Okay, so we've kind of talked about what she needs to be. Now let's talk about what criticisms have been levied against her. First thing I'm going to talk about is the fact that she's constantly buzzing in your ear. I said that she was like the Navi. I don't know actually how to say that. The Navi, isn't that Avatar? Anyway, she's the one who's talking to you most of the time, every time you return from a quest when you're trying to complete the storyline, because she's the one trying to tell you to go do the next part of the storyline. And this can get a little bit grating because Monster Hunter is all about exploration, and especially in world, right? Because you're discovering the new world. Everything is new, everything is fresh, everything needs to be explored. And yet you have a character who is constantly saying, hey, don't go that way, come over here. Let's finish this story beat. Let's fight this big bad monster. And that can be a little grating, especially if you're trying to build an armor set. And so you're hunting this one monster a lot, and every time you return from that quest, she's going, hey, forget about that monster, go hunt this one. And you're like, wait, no, I'm not ready to hunt that one yet. I'm trying to get this armor set, but these drops are so rare that I'm taking forever to get it. So please stop talking to me about this. So naturally, this is going to give this character a lot of backlash, right? Like, people aren't going to be super, super pleased with this character, and they're going to find her annoying just from this fact alone. So, what did they do in Iceborne? Well, they kind of shared the load a little bit. Now it's not just the handler that's doing these things, but it's Matt Mercer's character and it's other characters who are also trying to push and pull you along. And honestly, this is a really good change because other characters now are more involved in the story and are trying to also pull you along in different directions. So it's not all on the handler. One of the hard parts is, well, this is Iceborne at this point, so players have already spent a lot of hours in the game working with the handler, so they already know her as that personality. So the sharing the load might be a little bit helpful, but people are still locked onto the idea that it's the handler that's doing this the most, even when it isn't. Another criticism that's kind of levied against her is that the handler has this very bubbly personality, which is in and of itself a tough thing to have as a criticism, being like, oh, you're too cheery, you're too happy, you're too out there and big, and I need this personality to go down. Like that's a tough thing that a lot of women face a lot of the time. So it's hard to see this as like a valid criticism. But I'm going to try and talk about it, right? So this is a tough thing because, again, she has to be kind of the player's mouth in the scenario, where it's like the hunter is the player's eyes and the handler is the player's mouth, to be like, oh my gosh, that's so surprising. I didn't think that a monster like that existed. Oh, and all of these things that a player would be doing on the couch, but the hunter can't say that because the hunter can't talk. So it's this very interesting balance where you have this character that lives in this world that has to be surprised by these things. Now, I think where this becomes a criticism against her is the fact that we don't really see this from any of the other characters, especially in base world. And I think that comes from a couple of different decisions. One of those is most of the characters that you and the handler are interacting with are people who have already been here for a generation. They're the 4th fleet or the 3rd fleet or the 2nd fleet. So they're people who've lived here for a long time, some of whom have had children, and those children are now your age. And side tangent, why does Commissioner not have wife? Where wife? Was this impreg? Okay. Well, I don't know. Okay, we gotta get back on track. But so all of these people already know about these monsters, and they're not surprised until you get later into the game, right? But even then, they're a lot more, like, reserved, and I think that comes with their characters trying to be fulfilling this role of being these wizened elders who are trying to help push the new generation to make bigger discoveries. So the handler is kind of the one that's the most shocked by everything all of the time. And so in that sense, I can kind of understand where people are coming from. But anyway, I mostly bring this up because this is a point that got changed in Iceborne. When we hit Iceborne, we see her personality subdue a little bit. She's a little bit more restrained and caring, and she's a little bit less outgoing. And this is in part due to the fact that they have given her a more serious quest line, right? She's trying to learn to be confident in herself and uncover the mystery of her grandfather's strange relic that he brought back from the New World, right? She's also having to deal with rescuing her mentor, the Traveler, and also, Iceborne does a lot to aid the handler's characterization. Again, I've already said that the tough part here is that a lot of people have already made up their mind at this point because they've spent hours and hours and hours with the handler that we knew in base world. Also, to put a little bit of a criticism on this whole character arc of her being more confident, it doesn't really make sense because her character has always been confident in base world. She is the one that goes, hey, Admiral, actually, I don't think it's this thing. I think it's that, she's already stepping up and questioning authority and questioning what people are already assuming about the world in which they're exploring. So this whole, no, little one, be confident in yourself, it just doesn't quite catch. Okay, so the next point that we're going to talk about real quick is the terrible people who say that she's ugly. We're not going to get too deep into this because there's really no valid criticism here other than like maybe in a couple of shots the lighting doesn't look great, and the developers are still working on like good face models and like animations for faces and doing like big expressive movements rather than just like simple lip syncing, which I know lip syncing is not simple. It's very complicated. But yeah, so I don't want to get too far into it because those people are gross, and I genuinely think that they would have a better time if they realize that they just don't like women and they start dating people who aren't women. Because this whole idea of I fixed this woman to look better, and it's just these like super like honestly disgusting like exaggerations of feminine features on a person and being like, look, she's fixed. It's pretty gross and pretty dehumanizing, and I don't like to see it. Now to pivot into a still slightly touchy subject, but with a little bit more validity to it, is her quirk of being very, very hungry and loving food. Yeah, there's some discourse on this, but honestly, I think it's pretty easy to, dismiss, because the thing is, everybody within the world of Monster Hunter eats a lot. If you look at your hunter in every single game, they're eating so much food every single time. Sometimes, if I'm even slightly full and I look at the hunter doing that, I get a little sick. But like I talked about before in what she needs to be functionally and mechanically, I think the characterization of her being a very food-focused person makes sense when you're trying to justify, more or less, why she's the one that's cooking for you out in the field, right? Because in the past, it has always been palicos that cook for you, yet here she is cooking for you when you're out during a quest. But again, we see why this mechanic is so rarely used. And if it was more useful, if it was used more, there might have been less, I think, backlash to how much she likes food. Because we would see it mechanically paying off more. One of the ways that you could really fix this is you could have her involved in the cooking cutscenes, right? Like she could be basically like a sous chef for the Meowscular chef, and as he's like filleting a steak or whatever, she's like helping season it or something, right? And she's not like doing too much. She's letting most of the cats do all the work, but she's just kind of there to help a little bit. I think would have gone a long way in trying to make this character more foodie, if that makes sense. Because, like I said, really the only times that you are having the handler cook for you when you're out on a quest is when you've either fainted or it's been so long that your meal has run out or something like that. I can't remember if there's timed meals in World. I don't think there is, but you maybe some other reason, right? You're in the Guiding Lands or something, right? So it's a very, very rare occurrence. And then when those things are happening, say you faint and you want to get back out there, but you still need to eat because this is a tough monster, you're trying to get back into the action so quickly that more often than not, people are going to want to skip that cutscene of her cooking, so they're not going to be actually associating her with cooking the food. it's a very strange dynamic there. So now all of her personality about eating food is just kind of her talking about it. And besides this one mechanic, her love of food isn't really integrated into her character or being relevant to the story. I mean, the closest thing to it being relevant to the story is when she's out on the Deviljho quest and she's gathering mushrooms, but the gates had been sealed because the Deviljho sightings, but she was already out there because she didn't hear about it, and she gets attacked by the Jagras, and then the Deviljho comes and attacks the Jagras, and then she's stuck on the Deviljho. But this is already so far in. This is like end game content. We've already spent 40 some odd hours with her just kind of being a foodie and trying to have this funny little quirk about it, and then not really paying off. So what does Iceborne do about this? Well, they kind of just drop it, and I think this was one of the better choices they could have done, because the other option was to integrate food more into the story, and I don't think that would have worked. Right, so we've talked a lot about how she is involved in the story, and I think it's worth kind of talking a little bit more specifically on this, because this is, I think, another criticism that is made, right? I already kind of talked about how her discoveries that she makes really aren't that hard to find out for yourself. And yeah, so it kind of feels patronizing. And I think a really good example of this is when we're talking about the Rotten Vale and the Coral Highlands. And, you know, the tracker is like, I've spent decades of my life trying to figure out the relationship between the Rotten Vale and the Coral Highlands. And I need you to figure that out too. So we can compare notes. And then you do the thing, but like, the handler has this big revelation being like, well, okay, so the Coral Highlands is like basically what is being grown out of the Rotten Vale, because the Rotten Vale is where monsters go to die, and so it's basically mulch, and so then you have a lot of scavengers in there, and that mulch serves to feed the Coral Highlands. And it's like, yeah, I could tell that by the fact that these two maps are directly linked to each other. One is on top of the other, and the other one on the bottom is full of rotting carcasses. It's pretty obvious. Something that could have been done there, and you could see things like that done in other parts, but I'm going to use this part as an example, which is instead of just talking about how these two ecosystems work together, I think it would have been a lot cooler to have her discover things that like some players might never know, right? For instance, the Rotten Vale is, I'm pretty sure it's two Dalamudurs all tangled up in each other. And that's why the thing is so spirally, because you're in the skeleton of two Dalamudurs. And you can see this in a couple of different places on the map. The place right outside the Valhazak's nest, that is the skull of a Dalamadur. And the things that you shoot off from the ceiling, those aren't stalactites, those are teeth. And I think that's really, really cool, but most people aren't going to really notice that, because when they're going to shoot it, they're in the middle of a quest and they're not really looking at the broad strokes of the ceiling, right? And when you have a game that has the highest influx of new players, most of them don't know what a Dalamadur is, and so they're not looking for a giant monster within the structure of this setting. And so you could have the handler go, look at that. These are two Dalamadur that are entwined with each other. That's so cool. And look at this piece that's part of a different monster, and things like that would have gone a long way in solidifying her intelligence and not patronizing the player for just making these discoveries that they can notice with their own eyes. You know, it would show that she is smart, that she is thinking of these things. And she does figure this out, but she doesn't explain that. And to see that while you and her are moving through the environment, I think would have gone a long way. There are also moments when she is asking broader implication questions, but I personally feel like a lot of those moments are a little too late because the hunter, or rather the player, is usually already asking those questions a couple of quests ago. And so the fact that she's asking them again, it kind of feeds into this weird like patronizing where we're not really treating the player as somebody who's smart and knows how to like solve these mysteries. And that kind of sucks. And because she's the one that has to be the person to solve it, she's the one that's going to get the flack. So what does Iceborne do? Well, it kind of helps in that its mystery is a little bit harder to solve, right? It's not just, hey, this is what ecosystems are. There's this weird underlying thing that we don't see that seems to be causing these ripples throughout the ecosystem and moving these monsters here and about. And so it's a little bit harder to solve. Like, yes, you know as a player, okay, this is going to be a monster and we're going to fight the monster, but you just don't know what it is. And so the fact that she's asking these questions basically from the jump, it helps a lot, right? She's already asking what's at the source behind these things. And there's this mystery of this other fleet that came in and her grandfather's like shard from the Velkhana and like trying to find its source. It could have helped a lot, although it wouldn't have been possible to have tried to integrate this storyline into base world just like a little bit for her to be like, oh, I came here because my grandfather gave me something and told me to go out searching for it or something like that, right? I don't know. I'm not like perfect in these things, but yeah, the mystery is harder to crack. So it's a lot better in fixing those kinds of moments. Okay, so the next point that we're going to talk about is the fact that she needs to be rescued all the time. Boy, does she need to be rescued. And again, I think this is a symptom of the fact that the developers are really trying to lean into the hero's fantasy, but they don't have reasons for a bunch of other characters to be out in the field. And so the only person that you have next to you is the handler. And so the handler is going to have to be the one that needs to get rescued all the time. And I think this comes at the detriment of the handler as a character. She loses a lot of like survival instincts. I mean, heck, there's the first moment you meet the Rathalos, the king of the skies, the apex of the ancient forest, she has to get pulled by the hunter to dodge a fireball. Like, that's insane. She should know to not stand in the way of a fireball. They try to show this off in being like, oh, she's reckless, but she doesn't have survival instincts because they really want to make sure that the hunter seems like a hero. And honestly, I think that's a pretty big detriment to their character. Of course, there are a couple of moments here and there where other characters need rescuing, but like within the first like hour of the game, the handler needs to get rescued like 3 or 4 times. It's a lot, and that kind of sets the precedent, and it continues to do so, especially in base world. Now, it's also worth noting that the hunter needs rescuing a lot too. They're both new characters to this world, and as such, they're constantly landing themselves in trouble. But one of the biggest differences between the hunter and the handler is the hunter has a weapon. The hunter can do something about it, right? Whereas the handler she doesn't have anything. And I think this is a really big problem. And I think this like really, really has terrible impact on audience's view of her character. There are a couple of things that I am very, very passionate about when it comes to what can be done to fix this damsel in distress that they've crafted into the handler. And I think it's a really simple change. She doesn't need a weapon. She's not a hunter. I'm not asking for that. But I am saying that there are tons of mechanics and tools that the player can use in the game to divert a monster's attention away from you or another player. There's spoke bombs, there's lure pods, right? Like the agitating pods, like agitating mantle, there's the ghillie mantle, there's traps, there's farcasters, right? There's dung bombs, and we see the traveler use dung bombs to get the Odegarin away from the handler and the hunter and all of that stuff and save the two of them. And I get why she doesn't use those tools up to that moment, because they want to show off the tracker as this big hero in this very specific moment and how good she is at surviving in the area. But if the tracker is supposed to be the handler's mentor, then show the two of them learning from each other in mechanics like that kind of thing. Show the handler using a dung pod after she's met the tracker. Like, it just makes so much more sense. And then she'd actually be able to do things. I keep thinking about the moment when they finally make camp in the Rotten Vale. And there's a great Juros that's like eating a dead Titiyaku, and it's got a bunch of other Juros there. And I remember this moment completely differently than how it is in the actual game, because I think I just wanted her to have more agency. I remembered it as her jumping off the rope, running down, grabbing the fire slinger ammo, and then firing at the Gyros and the great Gyros and scattering the monsters and clearing the area. But then when I went back to get footage for this video, I found out, no, she jumps down and she gets the slinger ammo and then she tosses it to the hunter to do. And yeah, that's maybe a cool bit of teamwork, but we really don't see them have teamwork like that in any other parts of the game. And she could just do that. She could just do that. Give her these tools, and then the moments that she needs to be rescued mean so much more, because she's not just standing there in the way of a fireball. It also shows off how extra dangerous these monsters are, that even someone as resourceful as the handler needs to be rescued from time to time. It would have just made so much more impact on fulfilling the hero's fantasy. But I think the developers were just so focused on, let's fulfill this fantasy at every single moment we can. It came at the cost of fulfilling the fantasy and the cost of a character. So, what did they do in Iceborne? Well, they didn't do any of those things. They tried to show that she's more capable of having survival instincts. I mean, the first time you see Beatotis, she runs away, but she still waits for your order to run away. She's standing in the back. She's not in between you and the Beatotis, but she's waiting on you to go, okay, go, I'm gonna do this hunt. And she's like, yeah, okay. And that still continues throughout all of Iceborne. Anytime the two of you face a monster together, she waits for the player, or rather the hunter, to look at her and tell her to run away. Instead of running away herself. She still doesn't even have agency to run away on her own. And this is a really big problem for this character. Another point that they try to have her have more agency and things like that is when she tries to save the hunter after they first fight Velkhana in the Elder's Recess. But she goes to save the hunter, being like, hey, we got to get out of here. And then icicles fall and the hunter has to save the handler from the handler saving the hunter. And then the hunter gets knocked out. It's like, dude, you could have done something. But even in trying to save the hunter has to save her and then gets punished for it. So, like, it's only going to continue fostering this resentment for this character that just keeps getting in danger and making the hunter have to pick up the pieces after her. It's a pretty vicious cycle. So, to conclude, the main things that I can think of that would have helped the handler in being better received is giving her tools like a slinger and other sort of non-damage tools that divert monsters' attention. Letting her save the hunter at least once would have gone so far. It would also really help to show more moments of the handler and the hunter working in tandem, or at least giving her better survival instincts to get out of a fireball in time and things like that. She has a lot of moments when it comes to the story and getting the exposition, but she does not have a lot of moments in the action, and I think that would have gone a long way. Something that would have also helped is having shared the load on tugging the reins with other characters, or pull back on what those reins are a little bit more and give the player a little bit more freedom to explore. Would have gone a long way. I will also say, if she is going to have a mentor character and the game is going to show off learning all of these new things that the hunter gets to learn, it would make sense to have the handler learn those things too, and that would have also helped. It would have also been beneficial to let her have discoveries that aren't the most glaringly obvious things, or at the very least, giving her more stuff to back up those obvious discoveries that maybe the player might not have thought about. It would have made things a lot less patronizing. So that's what they did with the handler, and that's, I think, a lot of what happened with the reception of the handler and why it ended up being the way that it was. They made a couple of changes that they could, but unfortunately, I feel like a lot of those changes were a little too little and too late for it to make an impact on player reception to her character. Really, the next thing that you could do is figure out what happens with Alma, the next character in the direct sequel to Monster Hunter World, Monster Hunter Wilds. And I genuinely think she makes a lot of these changes and helps so much in the negative feedback that was given to the handler. Anyway, that's this video. That's what happened with the handler. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see me do other videos, please let me know. I'm thinking about doing one about Nata, because I think he's pretty misunderstood within Wilds. And if you want to see that, let me know, and that kind of support goes a long way. Anyway, thanks so much for sticking through with this, however long video it is. Talk to you in the next one, and happy hunting!